Hi everyone, MarkGFL here, bringing you my no-nonsense review of Forged of Blood. A game that had the potential to be fantastic, but is so utterly disappointing. It's a fantasy RPG with squad-based tactical battles like the XCOM series. It's got a full campaign, but both elements are just so painful to play. Let me explain why, and don't forget to follow me on Twitch where I test these games out to sort the good from the bad. Right, the story in brief is that your family were the rulers of this realm, until the humans who you subdued rebelled, murdered your father, and basically kicked you out of your fine abode. You play as one of the last two remaining heirs, and it's your job to reclaim the kingdom, fight off the rival claimants, and win the hearts and minds of the people. Gameplay is split into two parts: a campaign strategic map where you move your 3 squads of 5 soldiers around, followed by tactical battles when one of those squads meets an encounter. The battles take place on relatively small maps, and unfortunately these maps are repeated. I've seen the same map used for more than one location. Characters get the usual choice of moving and attacking, and everything goes in initiative order, so sometimes some characters will get to go twice before another one has a turn. Every character does get to carry 2 sets of weapons, so you can have like a melee loadout and a ranged loadout if you wanted, or even magic. The trouble is, melee weapons just really don't seem to be worth it in this game. It's so much hard work trying to maneuver your squads into position where they can actually attack. And here's the issue: as a player, you will have no clue where you have to position each individual soldier with a weapon in order to hit the bloody enemy, because the game uses this really strange range system. A weapon with a range of 2, 3 or 4 doesn't actually mean it can hit something 2, 3 or 4 squares away. It doesn't work like that. And melee weapons sometimes can only hit opponents in the 4 squares to the up, down, left and right of your character. Sometimes they can attack diagonally, and sometimes they can't, depending on the weapon. And sometimes they can't hit someone directly in front of them, adjacent to them, because you've got a reach weapon, which only hits things 2 squares away. None of this is explained by the game, by the way. You'll have to figure this out for yourself the hard way by marching your soldiers painstakingly into position and then finding out they've got no action points left to attack with because they're in the wrong place. Generally, just equip everyone with ranged weapons. It's way, way easier. I mean, just stand there in a defensive line and shoot the enemy as they march in one by one. It's so much easier than trying to march soldiers into melee range. The game does also include a cover system where objects on the map will provide cover, like bushes, chairs, tables, trees. The trouble with this is that it's completely broken. Cover, for example, gives you a benefit when you are hiding directly behind it, and it also gives you a penalty when you are hiding directly behind it and trying to shoot some guy out in the open. See, you might think that standing behind a table gives you some protection, but unfortunately it works both ways. The guy stood in the middle of the bar room is still harder to shoot because the table is in the way of your archer. Yeah, it makes the cover utterly pointless and not worth using. Also, the game mechanics only take account of the square on the map as counting as cover. It takes no account as to what object is in that square. For example, an 8-foot-high bookcase, yeah, you can still shoot through that. We'll get right up to the guy. No way. Hang on a minute, did you see that? But you can't stand behind a sodding bookshelf and claim to be out of line of sight so archers can't shoot you, and then swing a bloody battle axe through a solid bookshelf and hit some guy on the other side. That's just shit. The magic system in the game is incredibly deep and thought out and complex, but unfortunately it's just not worth using. Any character can use magic if you equip them with a magic stone, and you can create your own spells on this stone, and you can customize these to the nth degree. There are so many options for doing damage, healing, moving things, altering stats, and you can combine all these effects, or you can just power them up and focus them into one. The trouble is, it doesn't really work. Magic employs this system of 2 opposite schools, expel and drain. Once you've cast a spell of one school, you have to cast a spell of the opposite school before you can cast another spell of the same school. Which means you can't just spam healing turn after turn. You can cast one healing spell, then have to cast an alternative spell in the next turn. And the same with damage spells as well. Damage spells, by the way, I never got to be very effective. My healing, I managed to do a half-decent heal. But overall, Magic is just such a complicated pain in the ass, and the results just aren't worth it, that I just didn't bother in the end. One thing that I will say that the developers have got right in this is the skill system for your characters. It's a classless system, which means you can take any character and level them up in any way, shape or form you like. They get skill points from using the weapons they're equipped with, and as they get 2 sets of weapons equipped at one time, or 2 different weapons, they do actually develop skills in their secondary weapon even if they're not using it. It's a clever system, and also you can reset their skill points at any time. They also get general skills which build up other things, secondary things, and again you can kind of respec at any time with that for free. There's no cost. I really like the skill system. They've done this really well. I do generally like classless systems when they work, and this one is pretty good. But the rest of the party management system is a bit of a ball ache. There's tons and tons of equipment to find. You'll loot loads from battles. A lot of it's rubbish, and a lot of it has loads and loads of stats on that just kind of confuse things. Like bows just don't necessarily do damage and have extra range or armor penetration. They'll have loads of extra stats, and the same with armor. Some penalties as well. So you really have to focus so hard and think so hard and micromanage so hard what you're equipping on each character. You spend a lot of time between each battle and encounter just going through the stats and the skills and the equipment, trying to marry everything up, and it slows the game right down. And when you lose party members, either through death or because they've just got upset with your decisions in the game and sodded off, well, you have to recruit more at the castle, and each little individual party of the 3 groups that you send out, well, they take their equipment with them, and it doesn't really marry up with what's back at the castle, and vice versa, stuff that you buy there and then send out. All in all, it's more of a chore to manage than it needs to be. Now on to the kingdom management part of this game. The idea is that you conquer as much of the map from the rival claimants in the rebellion as possible, whilst winning the hearts and minds of the civilians and citizens and lords that live there. Now, when the game was released, you initially had a time limit on how much of this you could do, and then there was a United Nations style vote on which side was the winner. And it didn't matter if you owned most of the map, because you also have to please each region. They won't necessarily vote for you just because you've conquered them. And as there was a time limit, you couldn't necessarily do all the quests and everything. And you know what? This system was really unpopular, but thankfully the developers listened and they've patched in an alternative conquest mode where you just keep playing until you've conquered the entire map. You don't need to worry about any silly votes, because really the big downside of the game is this system that they use. It's called a tri-axis personality index. There's no light or dark, good or bad, right or wrong. Actions are judged by 3 philosophies: altruism, rationalism, and hedonism. Basically, let me put this really simply. Every time there's a bit of dialogue in the game and you're asked to make a decision, you'll normally have 3 choices that you can make, and they determine which of the 3 personality indexes you move towards overall. Well, guess what? Whichever one you pick, you will please the people and nations and areas that follow that ideal, but you'll also upset the other 2. Yes, that's right, folks. Every decision you make is going to upset 2/3 of the people who are eventually going to either fight for you or vote for you in the end game. This also means that you can't just play the character and style that you would like to make a story out of. You can't just be the tyrant. You can't just be the friendly noble, the honourable lord, feeding the peasants who've been thrown out and made refugees by the war. You have to play a balance of all these decisions, whether you want to or not. And it doesn't really matter what you choose in any individual situation, because overall you have to pick a balance. All the time knowing that you are upsetting 2/3 of everybody in the game. And when soldiers get upset, they just say, "Bye, I'm leaving you, mate. I don't like you anymore." Yes, those characters that you've tried to level up and train for the last 12 hours of gameplay just up and leave. What's worse than that is that the king, your brother, will occasionally come to you and have a right good bitch and moan that you're not leading the empire and conquering the land quite like he'd like you to. It happened to me that I was so sick of everything, he called me back and tried me with treason and sentenced me to be executed. And that was largely because I was being the nice guy and feeding peasants and rescuing civilians. But overall, the whole system is absolute bollocks. It gives you the illusion of choice with all the difficult decisions that the developers want you to have to think about. But overall, you just have to take a balance of them all anyway, whether you want to or not. Otherwise, you're going to have major trouble with soldiers leaving or with just these regions not voting for you come the end of the game. And you're going to lose anyway. and everybody is so quick to complain about every action that you do. These are people that you're doing favours for. It's like having a job where everyone else in your workplace is an absolute arsehole. They expect you to do all their work for them and constantly complain that you're not doing it right despite not telling you what they want doing in the first place. Also, the difficulty seems way out of whack at the way the game developers have set it at base. You can go in and change many sliders about how easy it is for your characters to hit or be hit, how much damage they do or the enemy do, rather than just giving a easy, medium, hard sort of preset levels. Even at the base level, this game is pretty hard, and right at the beginning of the game, you will meet lots of random encounters that are just way too hard for your party, but you'll have no indication that it's way too hard. Nothing to say, this is dangerous, this is too high a level. You'll just go wading in there with 5 soldiers, and they'll be wiped out in 2 turns because you've met a monster that is way too tough. No warning, it's just bye-bye to those soldiers. Whatever equipment and levels they'd gained, that's gone, and you're off with 5 fresh recruits. Yeah, that sucks. Graphics and sound are both okay in this game. They are basic, and I'm absolutely fine with that. I don't mind if a game looks pretty simple, as long as it plays well. But there are some issues. I mentioned the cover issues. Yeah, there's trouble with the way the game engine reads what you actually see on the screen, i.e. the height of cover objects makes no difference. Shooting through bookcases, through stable roofs, through carts. The characters don't always interact with what's on the screen properly. Check out this bridge. Hang on a minute. Hang on a minute. We could add this to the list. I have a list of things I want to talk about in the review, many of which to do with scenery and placement. Graphics not corresponding to the grid squares they're placed over. Levitation and hovering over a log bridge. And I also get the impression that the game either isn't quite fully finished or maybe hasn't been fully tested. I return to the castle? What the hell is this? I think we may have found a placeholder JPEG. Sounds are okay, there's not a lot there, there's not really any voice acting apart from a few grunts and moans that your characters make. There's an excellent narrator who gives you a speech in the opening scene and in the final scene of the game as well. That bit is really good, but other than that, nothing much to speak of. So overall, I really don't recommend the game. There are 2 main issues, some of which can be fixed. The graphical glitches, the cover system, that can all be altered and patched. But the main pretext of the game, this campaign map with this tri-axis personality system, that can't be fixed, that can't be altered, and that's the real downside of the game. It's like the developers, like a lot of Hollywood films do, they get so caught up in wanting the consumer to experience this story that they forget to actually make it entertaining, and I feel that's exactly what's happened here. The game feels like work all the way through, with everyone complaining at you and bitching and moaning, and it's just no fun. There is no incentive for you to actually help anyone, to win anything, to achieve anything, because you feel like every action you do just upsets too many people, and you think, to hell with it, bollocks, it's not worth it. So I'm sorry, Forged of Blood, but you're definitely not recommended from me. And it's such a shame to say that because I loved the idea of the tactical combat system. Maybe if the developers go on to make a sequel to this, take all these things into account, just go with a tactical combat system and improve it, and maybe a more simple campaign, it would be fantastic. But as it is, I'm afraid this is a no-go from me.